Welcome to the 8th episode of Voices from the Movement. This is a roughly bi-weekly series run by Unlock Democracy Canada. I'm the creative director. We are a national nonprofit, and our goal is to reimagine what democracy looks like and feels like, and raise the bar in terms of what we expect from our governments, from ourselves, and from all the political spaces that contribute towards the decisions that shape the world we live in. The series is about almost halfway over. We got lots more people, including Velma Morgan, who's in the audience today. She'll be on this show in a couple months. And so check it out. I'll be sending you emails for all the great guests we have. This one's really fun. I have a hunch. I think we're gonna have a really good time. Celina, you're kind of the first guest though that I don't really know very well. All the guests up until now were people I've been friends with. I know on a first name basis. I was like, hey, Kareem, hey, Marilou, hey, Peter, do you want to be on my podcast? And in this case, I was like, dear Ms. Caesar-Chavannes, you've never heard of me? Would you like to come on our thing? So thank you for accepting this, and great to hang out with you. We met very briefly a couple of months ago at your home when I was picking up some books that you had generously donated. But this is great. This is our first real hangout. And we get to do it with all of these other people as well. I'll do a quick land acknowledgement because this is a virtual call. I'll just say that all of us are in Canada somewhere right now, from coast to coast to coast. And wherever you are in Canada, you're probably on land that has been occupied for generations and generations and centuries by the first peoples of Canada, who have lived on these lands and taken care of them. And we are lucky and fortunate to be here. And those folks who have been living here for a long time still live here and are still a very important part of Canada. And there is much reconciliation to be done. And I just wanted to acknowledge that. I'm in Eugenia, Ontario right now. I just moved here recently. It is 2.5 hours northwest of Toronto, but for most of my life, I was a Torontonian. Happy Passover, happy Easter, happy Ramadan, happy whatever you're celebrating or not celebrating. Happy Monday, if that's all it is to you. That's also fine. And Celina, just a quick introduction about who I am. I think you and I are actually twin siblings, somehow separated at birth, other than the fact that I'm not very Black, I'm not very female, I'm not an immigrant, and I've never been a politician. We have so much in common, and reading your book was really fun to meet someone who shares so much with me. We should be buds. We were both born in 1974, both published by Penguin Random House, both narrated our own books, and I listened to your whole audiobook this week and loved it. We both scribble speaking notes onto scraps of paper instead of writing speeches. We've both not only struggled with mental health, but spoken about it openly. But most importantly, we've both dropped the F-bomb by hurling it at powerful politicians. We might be part of a very small elite club. I told City Councillor Denzel Minin Wong to fuck off in the council chamber, very loud, within hearing distance of the press gallery and City Council. I think your target is even more significant, but I would like to think there's about 10 or 20 of us who have not just spoken truth to power, but literally told them to fuck off when it felt appropriate at the right time. We have so much to talk about. We're gonna do this for about an hour-ish. There's no hard end. Celina, if you have to leave at any point, if you have family stuff or you're tired, whatever. But if you wanna keep going, we can keep going. We'll see where the audience is at. And if they have questions, folks, please feel free to put your questions in the chat and we will try and get to them when we can. Where do we begin? Wow. Why don't we start? Well, how are you doing? Well, one thing is I listened to your book and it ends, what, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? It ends, the final part is you leaving Ottawa. It's your last day in Ottawa. Yeah. So I feel like okay, I just caught up with your life, but there's a big gap. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. You know what? I think if I'm going to have an honest conversation with you today, um, I still think I'm feeling the ripple effects from leaving politics. Again, a life before politics, private entrepreneur, owning a research management firm, very private, public facing figure who is that same bold, transformative individual, and enough to tell off a prime minister. And there is going to be some scar tissue left after that. And I'm not sure that all of that scar tissue is healed. So I would say I'm doing great, but I'm not. I'm kind of still figuring out my way through the after effects of what was a very tumultuous time in 4 years of what I thought was supposed to be the best transformative 4 years of my life.
And for those who haven't read the book, I mean, I'm assuming some of you know, I hope you all know at least the basic background of who Celina is. I'm not going to do the whole bio and the role that she played in Parliament, parliamentary secretary, very public resignation from the Liberal caucus. If you don't know that, then you should have spent some time Googling. But the book is fantastic, and it really goes into a lot more detail of that whole period. But also, the first like 9 chapters is really your whole life up until politics. And I'll admit, there are parts of it where I was like, why is she telling me all this? Like, this is so personal, so like memoirish. I want the political meat. And then I realized how it all fits together. And when you tell the political story, you relate almost every scene or episode back to something in your childhood. So looking in the mirror and seeing the same expression you saw on your father's face when he came home from work and experienced racism. So suddenly the first 9 chapters all make sense because it's the context which explains how you felt in Parliament. Anyways, my point is, amazing book. But what was really interesting to me is how the electoral part of your life came out of the blue. It wasn't something you had been working towards. You were really embedded in the business world, starting a family. You weren't like many of us. A lot of political activists like are obsessed with electoral politics from childhood. So it kind of started out of the blue and then ended with quite a bang. That must have been really jarring. And I'm wondering where that leaves you now. I think the title of the chapter was, but Celina, you hate politics, or but I hate politics. Yeah. So you went into it out of the blue. Suddenly you're not just in politics, you're the friggin' parliamentary secretary to the prime minister, you're high profile, national name, roller coaster, read the book if you want to hear all about it. But then suddenly it stops, you quit caucus, you decide not to run again. Holy shit. Like, where does that leave you now, 2-3 years later, in terms of how you see yourself in political spaces? I mean, we have a provincial election in June. We have municipal elections all across Ontario, including Whitby in the fall. Are you just like so turned off that you're just sick of it for a while? Or are you trying to invent new ways? Door 1 didn't work very well. Are you trying door 2, door 3?
I'll take door 2 for 100, Alex. No, so there's a lot to unpack in what you just said, and I'll just briefly go through a number of things. So the first 9 chapters, yes, are not about politics. I was never interested in politics in my life. And it's a 13 chapter book for those who don't know. Chapter 10, 11, 12, and 13 are my 4 years in politics. Very, very clearly laid out, but the first 9 are just my life. And I say that it's my life because I want people to understand why I was such a fierce advocate for some of the things I advocated for while I was in politics, why I was determined, as I told the people in Whitby when I knocked on their door, when they said to me, Celina, you're going to change when you get into politics, you're going to be different, politics is going to change you, you're not going to be the same authentic Celina who's knocking on my door because you're going to have to conform. I wanted people to understand why I didn't conform, why when I knew that I couldn't get elected in Whitby with just liberals voting for me. I needed to get some conservatives voting for me. I needed to get some MBTP votes. Why I was staying true to form is because of all of the pains and hurts and mistakes that I'd made in those first 9 chapters, which, Dave, there are no secrets after you read the book, but the first 9 chapters, I wanted people to understand that I didn't sympathize with people that I advocate for. I don't sympathize with business owners who are struggling. I don't sympathize with people who are challenged with mandatory minimums. I don't sympathize with those things. I empathize because I know what that pain feels like. And I wanted people to understand where that empathy came from. It came from living those pains, living those hurts, living those mistakes. So that's why the first 9 chapters were written as they were. But you're absolutely right. Politics came completely out of the blue. I was doing my executive MBA in 2013, entered a politics course as part of the program for the first time. And the professor talked about politics. And I was just like, holy crap, I could do this. This seems like something I could do. And I Googled how to become a member of a political party in December in 2014. Of course, Jim Flaherty passed away that year. I was in a by-election, then I was in a general election. So there was a lot of serendipity at play. But I brought my experience as a researcher. Of course, I worked in cognitive neurorehabilitation. I ran Canada's first national epidemiology study on neurological conditions. My background is in brain research management. And so I took a lot of that research data-driven mindset and applied it to what I thought would be a government that was really transformative, doing government differently. And when I saw that that wasn't happening, when I saw that I was like running against a brick wall of what I, in retrospect, could see was a lot of, diversity is our strength, rhetoric, feminism is our thing, politics. I was really disheartened. And I think where I am now, when you talk about where am I now and what those political spaces look like with, elections that are coming up, I don't know if I'm even tapped into the elections that are coming up, to be honest with you. It's painful. It really is painful. It's painful to watch. I don't watch TV. I don't have cable anymore. I don't go to the grocery store. I don't shop. I don't do a lot of things. I've had death threats. I've been sued. I've been harassed. I've been threatened. I don't do a lot of things. And I certainly don't watch what the orchestra that made that happen to me. So I don't watch it on TV. And so you say to yourself, well, Celina, you were really political and now you're out. No, I was a politician. I'm no longer a politician. I still am quite political. So I still engage in the political discourse without actually being a politician. And that means that I'm still advocating, possibly or most often behind the scenes, for things that I really care about. Of course, mental health, justice, those kinds of issues that are critically important to me, but also understanding that, as a person with multiple intersecting identities, as a Black woman, I've always had to be political. I've always had to have that kind of political lens, even though I was never interested in politics or being a politician. That has not left. I'm still doing that. And then I think more importantly, I'm currently doing my PhD in neuroscience and trying to understand, in particular, understand that empathy piece a little bit more, especially when I think about the way I was treated by my own political party. How do we start to make empathetic decisions that are able to impact people in the right way? And I think about myself in politics. If you can't look at the person sitting beside you and treat them with fairness and justice and kindness, how can you enact laws that impact 37 million people in a way that does right by them? And so understanding how the brain works in that respect is what I'm doing now. And I'm I, I feel like I'm not really answering the question because I'm still in this nebulous place of still being quite hurt, but at the same time, trying to find some kind of answer to what went wrong.
Thank you. It's a beautiful answer. I'd like to talk about your experience, or ask you some questions about your experience in the legislature. And I want to break it up into the part where you were a card-carrying liberal and the part where you were an independent. I'm really fascinated by the independent part, but I'm also fascinated in your liberal part, knowing how independently minded you are. In the book, Tragedy in the Commons, where the folks at Samara Canada did exit interviews, they talk about how there's supposed to be three different forces that pull politicians sometimes in different directions. You're supposed to represent your own views. I'm Celina. You're supposed to represent the party and its platform, and you're there to represent your constituents. Right. And obviously those could entirely conflict. Any of those three could conflict with the others. Yeah. What was aside from the high profile issues that we all know about, what was that like on a day-to-day basis in terms of just private members' bills and votes, as knowing that Canada has one of the most rigid party disciplines out of any Westminster country, where everyone just seems to vote the way they're told? What was it like being a really independent thinking person in that kind of rigid environment?
First of all, thank you to Kirsty and Tina for your comments in the chat. So this is where there is a challenge, right? So again, in 2015, I ran on a platform that was steeped in change, hope, a platform that said add diversity, add women, change politics, diversity is our strength. One that was supposed to be bold, transformative, we're going to be government differently. To Harminder's point, electoral reform was on the platform. It was things that, you know, we thought were going to be like big transformative measures in Canadian history. And then in October of 2015, we were elected with a majority, Dave, right? So then it was like, oh shit, like this is actually gonna happen now. Like all of this stuff is actually gonna happen because we don't just have one half of the house, we have the beachhead on the other side. So all of these things that we actually said, boiled water advisories ending, electoral reform, dropping mandatory minimums, cannabis legalization, all of these things are going to happen. So we know what platform things are going to happen. Let me put my ideas forward because I know that there's some things that I want. And most people think that I was in there because I wanted like, you know, stuff just for the Black community. I went in there wanting a national brain strategy and a strategy for seniors care. Those were the two things that I wrote in my initial plan as parliamentary secretary to the Prime Minister. When we looked at what happened in the US, every dollar that was invested in brain research, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, epilepsy, across the age continuum, that is my home. That is where I reside in my past life as a researcher. For every dollar invested, there was a $4 return. So I knew that if we invested in a national brain strategy, as opposed to a dementia strategy or autism strategy or a siloed strategy around the brain, we would get a return on that. Anyhow, that was never even looked at. So the interesting thing about somebody who has that, so this is me landing in 2015 going, oh my God, this is going to be revolutionary. And then inch by inch, you sort of start to figure out, and not so revolutionary. Oh, okay, well, ooh, no, wow, okay, well, no, maybe, okay. So you're really just interested in more somewhat status quo. For me, I didn't quite know how to fit in that space. So you might remember a couple of years into our mandate, there were some changes to small business tax regulations, who could be named in a company for a small business, and it was a national fiasco. I was a small business owner. So maybe I didn't read the handbook on how you're supposed to behave in parties. I didn't read the handbook, let's be honest. And so I wrote a letter to Bill Morneau, like, what the fuck are you doing? And when my constituents would ask, like, what am I doing about this piece of legislation that's hurting their business? I actually just showed them the letter that I wrote to Bill. When you start doing that, Dave, in the structure, I don't think you're liked a lot. Right?
Which raises the question, what's the point of having MPs?
But that's just it. So everybody, and the challenge with that, though, is that a few weeks later, Bill ended up changing the whole thing and scrapping it. So I'm thinking, okay, well, if I had just said, okay, well, I'm going to go along to get along and not tell my constituents that I challenged the finance minister, then I would look like a chump because I owned a small business. I knew how this was going to adversely impact them. And I wanted them to know that. But if I didn't do that, and then he changed it and scrapped it anyway, then I look like an idiot. And I'm not interested in looking like an idiot. So I guess the long and the short of it is, how does the Celina versus the party versus the constituents of Whitby? I actually didn't really think about the party, to be honest. My loyalty was to the people of Whitby.
Right.
They hired me. They were my boss. They were the ones that I had to report to, and they would give me my job back. The party would not give me my job back. They don't have authority to do that. The people of Whitby had authority to give me my job back. And it was to them that my allegiance lied. And again, maybe I needed to read the handbook that said that I had to straddle the middle. That's probably why I'm not there anymore.
Did you?
I guess all's well that ends well.
Did your political journey of exclusion towards the end? I mean, you did it on your own terms. You left the Liberals when you wanted, how you wanted. Jane Philpott and Jody Wilson-Raybould were kind of unceremoniously booted out, but the three of you ended up on the outside. The two of them decided to run again as independents. Was that something you entertained at all? Or were you just like, I'm out of here?
I entertained it, but I mean, I really, we didn't have enough numbers as independents to really make an impact. If there were enough independent seats to actually sway a party vote or a party sort of mandate, or to have that kind of conversation with the independents, that would be impactful, certainly. But by the 43rd Parliament, there were a handful of independents. I mean, Jody was elected and then people were booted out for whatever reason. But I wasn't interested in banging my head against the wall for another 4 years. So
fair enough.
Yeah, no, I thought about it and I really wanted to support Jane and Jody, which I did. But I wasn't really interested in doing that. And even sitting as an independent in the 42nd Parliament, remember that was done in March. There was only a couple more sitting months.
Right.
But I really wanted to make that statement that there was something misaligned with the current infrastructure of our government. And I wanted that to be on the record that I couldn't sit with that.
Comment from Murray that, he saw similarities with how Jody described being treated.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there was an article in the Star just last week about the Ontario NDP Black Caucus, which was a point of pride, I think 4 years ago, and now it seems to be falling apart.
But just to Murray's point here, Jody, Jane, and I were not friends for 4 years. We're friends now. I did not, I had a drink once with Jody in that 4-year span. We had it at at Zoe's at whatever that hotel is called. I can't remember. We had one.
Chateau Laurier.
Chateau Laurier, thank you very much. But to read Jody's book, and I think this is why it's so disheartening for me on this side, to read Jody's book and see the similarities, to even listen to Mumalak Kagak speak, her exit speech when she left Parliament, and NDP, it validated a lot of the things that I was so concerned about talking about. And it validated the things that I talked about and was gaslit for. I had to the things I don't go to the grocery store for right now. It's why I hardly leave my house. You know, it's that feeling like, am I going crazy? Is what I'm saying happening to me actually happening? Because it doesn't seem like it's happening to anybody else. And then you read Jody's story and you hear Mumalak Kagak's story. And, you know, I sit across from Jane and I see the sadness in her face. I mean, let me be clear. Whatever happened to myself and Jody, look, I'm a loudmouth, Jody's a loudmouth. Maybe we deserved it. Jane Philpott is a saint. She is a saint. And honestly, she did not deserve what happened to her. And I will say this every opportunity that I have. She did not deserve what happened to her. And we are all on this sort of outskirts because of a very challenging so-called leader.
So let's talk about that for a moment without making it personal about him, because it's not about him. This is not an isolated issue of white straight men in power not really walking the walk. There was an original awakening around these topics of anti-oppression, let's say 15, 20 years ago, that really focused on the visual representation. There was that famous blog, "Oops, I have an all-white male panel," and people would post photos, which still happens occasionally. But there was definitely an awakening that it's not cool to visually have all white men at the seats of power, and that was an easy error to quantify and correct in terms of visual diversity. And I think what we're all waking up to now is that can obviously just be tokenism, and you can be diverse without being inclusive. My question to you is, how would someone like me know? I can show that a panel is diverse or that a team is diverse. How do we measure the success of leaders numerically, quantifiably, that they're being inclusive, other than it being an anecdotal story afterwards that someone really fucked up and failed? How do we hold ourselves? How do I hold myself to account? What advice would you offer?
And so the advice is not mine necessarily. If we look at the research around inclusion and belonging, and I'm going to quote work from, I'll get the name in a minute and I'll put the article in the chat, but it's not just about diversity or inclusion. It's about understanding your own power and privilege. And so one, understanding that you have it. And number two, deciding that you're going to shift over a little bit out of the way and make space for those who have multiple intersecting identities. That doesn't mean that you remove yourself from the table. That means that you create space. And by creating space, the person who is sitting at the table is allowed to, or is given the space to, not allowed to, because that's very patriarchal, but given space to raise their hand, provide dissenting opinion, challenge the status quo, be rewarded for their contributions, have their contributions actually taken into consideration, and not be afraid of retaliation for their commentary. And if I give myself as an example, you know, when the 2018 budget was announced, and there was monies in there for Black communities in particular, I raised my hand and said, are you nuts? Like, this isn't even a rounding error. Like this, I was furious because I wasn't consulted. And I was told, again, the space was created there, or maybe not. I was told to get on board and decide what kind of liberal I wanted to be. So even at the table, you're not even allowed to provide that dissenting opinion. You're not allowed to challenge. You're not allowed, even within. So a lot of people often say to me, well, Celina, you did everything externally. You should have, you know, tried to work within the party. You should have. What makes y'all think I didn't? Like, y'all didn't hear nothing from me until 2019. What makes you think for 4 years I did not try to disrupt, to challenge, to push, to negotiate, to befriend, to do what it took on the inside? I was not a successful entrepreneur because I was stupid. I was a successful entrepreneur because I knew how to play a game. And in this game, you also have to know how to be able to create those patterns, that political savviness, use that business acumen to be able to get what you want on the inside. And unfortunately, that was not the case. And so if you don't have that, then what you have is tokenism. What you have is, you have someone who looks like they have multiple intersecting identities, who is at a table, but they're only there to be quiet.
Right.
And once they start talking,
yeah,
then you say, hey, little lady, just quiet your pretty little head there.
And you weren't even, like, you weren't a backbencher. You were made parliamentary secretary, but then couldn't get 15 minutes of the prime minister's time. I mean, so there were red flags right from the get-go.
I know
that, but I mean, there's nothing you could have, I mean, is there anything you could have done differently going back that would have been authentic? I can't think of anything, but let's say you're in there, it's your third month, fourth month, and you're like, holy shit, I can't even meet with this guy. I drafted this whole framework that they're not even responding to. Like,
I would have quit in April when I originally did. I wouldn't have stayed until December.
Right.
I would have said, you clearly don't need me as your parliamentary secretary. Bye. I would have left. I would have stood in that power and did that. And unfortunately, in April, I'm going to choose my words carefully, because there's some things that I did not put in the book just because I just don't feel like it's necessary. But there was a lot that it played on me, it played on my mental health, it played on everything. And I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to keep quiet and just hopefully this will end at some point.
What were some of the really positive experiences
Yes.
in the legislature? You talked a few points about Adam Vaughan being a good white male ally. You talked about Jane being supportive. There must have been some private members' bills that excited you.
Yes.
What were the high points as an MP amidst all this bullshit?
So I'd say that there was a few. The first one was the 2017 budget that allocated $5 billion towards mental health funding for young people under the age of 25. Talking to Jane Philpott before that budget came out, I said, Jane, you know, what do you need for your budget? She said, I want to make sure we have this mental health funding. And she said she needed $3 billion. I was like, 3? That's such a weird number. Let's just make it 5, make sure everybody gets what they need. And I, without divulging caucus secrets, I went up to the mic and I told my story. And I said, we needed 5 billion. And there was 5 billion in the budget. And that made me really happy. Adam Vaughan, is a solid individual. He was a friend, he was an ally, he was just amazing individual to support some of the causes that I thought were really important, even though it was not enough funding for some of our communities. He was an ally in making sure that there was funding to marginalized communities that for the first time in Canadian history, having monies allocated to Black communities across the country is phenomenal. So he did that. And I would say one of the nicest moments was right near the end, where I wanted to introduce my bill, which I knew would die on the order paper, but I still wanted to introduce the bill 486. And that couldn't have happened without Candice Bergen and Colin Carey. And, at the end of Parliament, I'm an independent member and I'm saying I want to introduce this bill and I don't know how to do it. And Colin Carey says, I'll get my people to help you. And within a week, I have a bill drafted by the Library of Parliament. It's ready to go. And then there was a death on the last day of a Conservative member. And I thought, there's no way I'm going to be able to introduce this bill because somebody died. You're just gonna have to sit quiet. And myself and Jody, because Jody's seconding my bill, Jody's sitting there and we're like, it's not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen. And Candice Bergen comes up and says, are you ready? And all I wanted to do was burst into tears because I was like, are you kidding? You don't have to do this, Candice. It's one of your people. And she said, I know this is important for you, so we'll do it. And I think for me, sorry.
It's okay.
I think for me, it would have been, that's one of the regrets that I have is, you're in this world where they say the rules are, you can't, if you're a liberal, you can't talk to a conservative or fraternize with the enemy or whatever they want to call it, whatever the unwritten rule is. And I had some really great friends on the other side that I never really got to develop friendships with because we just kept it quiet. Michelle Rempel, we will never agree on any particular piece of legislation, probably in the history of the world. But Michelle Rempel is a ride or die. She's the real deal. She's just one of those people that when I was having the worst of worst days, I would get a message from. So I think there were people on both sides or all sides of the aisle that were really decent, but we were never really encouraged to be authentic in those spaces. And I wish I was a little bit more because there were some really beautiful moments that happened.
It's so rare to see cross-party dialogue of any sort.
It happens more than you think. It just doesn't, we don't really show it, and we don't really show it in our vulnerable moments. I will be forever indebted to Michelle. I love her. To Candice, to Colin, who we go and have ice cream. We haven't had ice cream in a couple of years because of COVID, but we hang out here because he's so close. So, it happens. It's just not a thing for us. We don't show it. And I can't understand why we don't show that we're human beings. Dave, when I met you on my doorstep, I didn't say, hi, welcome to my home. My name is Celina. I'm a liberal. We don't know what anybody on this screen actually is in terms of their politics. We don't actually know what they do in the booth.
Yet so many people do have a kind of mob mentality, and they do drink the Kool-Aid. And I think
there's wine. So why are we drinking Kool-Aid, y'all?
That's right.
Let's just drink wine. My wine is done. Can I get another one? No?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll have somebody. Give me another one.
No.
No. Another drink.
So Stephen mentioned that part of the reason that people don't work across
He
party
heard us.
is the voting system, which I think is true. Oops, I didn't mean to yell that loud. I'm not surprised. Based on what I've read in the book, he's a very supportive guy.
I know. Sorry. Okay. Oh my God, that's so bad. You get me in trouble, Dave.
Sorry. You get yourself in trouble all the time.
I know, a lot.
So first past the post, our voting system is definitely well known to create very polarizing political landscapes, and more proportional systems tend to create more collaborative coalition governments. So I think that's part of the problem. And our organization and Fair Vote Canada does a lot of advocacy to change the voting system. As a creative director of a group that pushes for reforms, I would love to hear from you what, I can't change Justin Trudeau's heart or Gerald Butts. I can't change who's in power, but we are trying to push for structural changes to the system to make the bones of the system more inclusive. Do you have any suggestions or requests, like when you request music at a karaoke bar, like we're an advocacy group and we're taking requests tonight. What would you like to see changed as either a rule or something about the physical spaces? You talked about the painting of the forefathers that you had to swear your oath under. So much of everything in Ottawa is colonial to its core and misogynist to its core. What should we try and fix? What's the low-hanging fruit here? Sorry, it's a big question. And
that's like a heck of a question. And admittedly, that's why I'm doing my doctorate in looking at empathy. Thank you. At empathy. Sorry, thank you. At empathy. Because I don't actually think that the challenge is, so electoral reform could have happened. I don't think there was the political will to make it happen. Again, it was an election, a campaign promise. We wanted something bold. We had a majority. If it was going to happen, it should have happened. There wasn't the political will for it to happen. Why not? That's the question that we need to be asking. It's not about, we were spinning this tale about, what was it? We didn't have consensus from we were seeing something along those lines. And I was just like, what? Like we could actually do this. So there was something with the political will to have it done. And so we have to really look at, and this might not be about Justin Trudeau necessarily, but if we ever want to do this again when it comes to electoral reform, how do we challenge leaders to not do what is politically expedient, meaning what is in the best interest of them getting reelected versus what is right for the people. And I saw a number of different times that the choice was made to be politically expedient, meaning do what is best for us to get reelected versus doing what is right for the people. So we could talk about electoral reform. We could talk about the repeal of mandatory minimums, which was unconstitutional, that are still not repealed, which was a 2015 promise. We could talk about reducing the cost of pardons, which just happened a couple of months ago. So I'll say like it did happen, but these kinds of things that wouldn't allow for a liberal majority. If we repeal mandatory minimums, we would look soft on crime and lose votes to the Conservatives. If we instituted an Indigenous rights framework, it didn't sit well. These kinds of things that we make decisions on that hurt people, and allow your ego to stay intact, allow you to be preserved, allow self-preservation of your borrowed job, that's challenging. And I think Canadians writ large should be concerned when leadership says that one thing is really good. This will be the last first past the post. We heard that a million times before 2015. The last first past the post. So why is it not? Did you not do your homework, bro? I mean, if it was supposed to be the last, why is it not?
Or it might have been because he did his homework.
He did his homework when he got there.
Yeah.
Right. So then that's the question you have to ask yourself. What happened in that moment when you have to make a decision? And this is why I'm studying empathy and equity from a neurological perspective. What happens to the cognitive dissonance that is required when you have to make a decision that is right by the people, meaning you have to have the empathetic courage to do what is right, and yet choose to do what is wrong. There is a cognitive misalignment there. And what causes that, and how does that happen? So we know what we need to do. This has been studied. We don't need to study not one more thing. Not one more. If the budget, if anywhere in that last budget says we need to study something, Jesus Christ, like, we are done studying. It's now about doing. And yet still, we are spending more money studying. Even I am doing my dissertation. Shoot, I should take my own advice. But you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yet they didn't turn to you for advice on issues that you're an expert on, which is...
You know the worst feeling in the world, Dave? I gotta tell you, the worst feeling in the world is sitting somewhere knowing you are smart and just realizing that it's like, oh my God, look at this. Look, Dave, look at this. I'm black. Oh my God, Dave, look, I got boobs. I'm a woman. That's the only reason I'm here. Like, what about my brain? Like, I could not wrap my head around that at all. I couldn't.
So I have a question. In a few times in the book, you talk about how when you stood your ground and spoke truth to power, even though the repercussions were painful, you felt good about it because you knew that people were watching and kids were watching. And if you inspired even one person to, if you were able to be a positive role model for, young Black girls, that made it worth it. Having been through this machine now and kind of spat out the other side, what advice would you have to those young girls now who are like, Celina rocks, I want to run for office? Would you be like, don't do it, or do it differently, or do it with a different party, or just like...
So Dave, you didn't read the acknowledgements at the end of the book.
It's true. I didn't do the acknowledgements.
I'm disappointed. Did you not read the introduction either?
No. I did it on first of all, I did the audiobook. You've been speaking to me in my car all week. And it started with the intro, so I did that. But then when it said, and now the acknowledgements, I did turn it off.
I will say that so I love reading the prologues and the acknowledgements of every book that I read. So I leave all the juicy bits in those two parts. And so if I don't mind, I will read. The book is 261 pages. I'm reading page 260, not giving anything away. I'll read, to answer your question, what I wrote on page 260. I want to acknowledge those who believed in me when I did not believe that this crazy idea of politics would work. My gratitude goes to the young people who, I'm going to start to cry, who dream of a better world and work towards that goal. And then I list a bunch of young people that I know: to Brianne, Delara, Jordan, Onome, Olivia, Heba, Arazu, Sydney, Khalil, Rael, Reja, Jada, and Alicia, and others who want to change the world. I will reiterate what I wrote in the first version of my resignation letter, because of course I had to change the resignation letter, so it was a little softer. And this is the quote: I also know that I have no right to ask what I'm about to ask, but I will do it anyway. I'm going to ask women of all backgrounds to run, and run in packs. Get your girlfriends and their girlfriends and run like we have never run before. My experience in politics has demonstrated to me that there is capacity to change political structures from inside, but only if we are there in numbers. The treatment I received from the leadership of my own party was disappointing and regrettable, and I apologize for leaving before I had an opportunity to make any change. But I trust that women, especially women of color and other Black women, who are way stronger and braver than I am, will finish the job. I know that our country will be better for it. And then I skip a few paragraphs and I end the book with this: to the people of Canada and beyond, your value is not determined by your title, and your leadership does not require a title. The power has always belonged to the people. It is time that the people realize their power. It is not enough to hear my voice. We need to hear you too. And I end with that. So I don't tell them to go away from politics. I want them to run, but I don't want them to run and be alone in this system, because I want them to be protected. I want them to know that they have people around them that are going to shield them and hold them and cover for them. I have a piece in there that I write to moms who, often feel that they can't run. It's like, you're the best people to run. If you could get a kid to eat broccoli, you could do anything.
That was an amazing answer. Thank you for reading that. And it makes so much sense. You were the only Black female MP out of 338. It would have been a completely different experience if there were 10 of you, 15 of you.
It wouldn't have been so lonely. And there's more of us out there. So chapter 13 is where I talk about the things that I wish I had done differently. And I wish I had not been, I wish I hadn't let I spell it loneliness of the space make me feel alone. I wish I had connected with other women who were onlys in other, maybe not in politics, but in business and IT and banking, and not felt so lonely. But again, you go in there not knowing and then being jarred by the juxtaposition of what you thought was going to happen and what actually happens, and you're trying to catch your footing on that. And then my mental health is being impacted and I have a nervous breakdown, and all I'm thinking throughout most of those years is, I don't want to die here. And then you get a death threat, and then you get sued, and then all this other stuff, and you're like, damn it, I really just don't want to die at all. And now you're in survival mode and you're just trying to survive. And so you forget that there's other things that you are supposed to do. And I guess I ask forgiveness for forgetting about some of those other things, but I just hope that young people see this story and know that it's not a negative, there is a happy ending, because I've been so vocal with what I've learned. And so they're not going into this experience with an unknowingness, a misunderstanding. They're going with their own experiences plus Celina's experiences, and then understanding that this can be hard, it will be hard, but what do I need to do to navigate it? And that's why chapter 13, I said, these are the things that I would have done differently.
Any questions from the audience? You can actually put your hand up or just turn on your microphone and ask a question as if we're all hanging out in a room. Alan, go ahead.
Um, if you can answer this too if you want. You brought this up earlier about the recent events in the Ontario NDP's Black Caucus. Specifically, one of their members lost a nomination, which is a very rare occurrence in provincial politics. I said this in the chat earlier, but my understanding is that NDP's party structure, they allow open nominations for whether it's an incumbent holding the riding or not. So in a way, that's almost a very pure form of democratic quality in my view. But it seems the narrative in the last 2 weeks since that story broke is that this is a disservice to Black political leadership. And I don't think I could understand it myself, obviously, because obviously of my own identity, but Brampton, that's where this took place, is majority South Asian. The person who won the nomination was a South Asian man. It's not like it was a white person taking over from a Black person. So I struggle to understand if this was as big a deal in hurting the Black community politically as it is, because as far as I can see from the recent nomination lists, each of the three main parties in Brampton actually has a Black woman in their list of candidates: the NDP, the Liberals, and the Conservatives.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't know if Celina wanted to pipe in, even though this might not out of a wheelhouse a bit, but like, is this really something that is that detrimental to helping the Black political leadership? Or like, because they were talking about, oh, Andrea Horvath didn't provide enough support for this particular person, or the party didn't back up its member, even the members of the Black Caucus, like Andrea's own caucus members are speaking out on this. So
Okay,
just,
thanks for the question, Alan. Celina, anything you want to comment on the Ontario NDP situation?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one, because they have those open nominations even when it's an incumbent, and it's a numbers game, right? So you're trying to reestablish your footing in a riding where you might lose. That one's it's difficult, Alan, and I don't know if I could answer how to do that any better. I mean, when you think about the percentage of Black Canadians across Canada, it's 3.5%, right? So 1 point something million people. We just don't have those numbers. So how can you support sort of the smaller numbers of candidates and ensure that they're reelected, ensure that they're able to maintain their incumbency, or whatever the word is? That is a challenge, and it'll be something that the NDP may have to relook at a future date. I would also say, just to play a little bit of devil's advocate, that it is also up to that individual as well to ensure that they are driving that community support. That community, I grew up in Brampton, that community is able to come out for them as well. And I don't know the dynamics of that, so I don't know how either of those two scenarios played out. But it is a numbers game, and for some communities, there is going to be additional support that is required if they want to diversify political spaces, or any other space for that matter.
Senator McPhedran, thank you for joining us tonight. I know you have a lot on your plate. Nice to have you here. What's your question?
Thanks very much. It's a question that has to begin with an acknowledgement of appreciation to you, Celina. I just wanted everybody to know what I put in the chat, which is you are one of the founding members of the Canadian Association of Feminist Parliamentarians. And in many ways, I think it was an attempt that many of us wanted to try to create a safer place for women parliamentarians across all the many, many boundaries. And my question really is, I don't think, I mean, I have looked at your book but I wonder whether, can you see a time, not right away, but can you see a time in your life when you might return and be part of building the kind of genuine support that you talk about being needed? And I completely agree with you.
Yeah. I won't shy away from going back into politics. I was actually in Nairobi last week, sitting across from Chris Alexander and Ben Pearson, having drinks, and being encouraged. Like, they're like, you have unfinished business. You got to get back in there. You got to go back in. And I was like, you know what, both of you shut up. This is not what we're supposed to be talking about today. But it was actually quite invigorating. I don't mind going back. What I will say with no uncertain terms is that I am a liberal, more than any other party, but I will not go back under this particular leader. When that changes, game on.
And what about municipal? There's no parties in Whitby. You could just, run for mayor or something, see how it goes.
Yeah, Mayor Mitchell said he's not running again, but I think there's a number of people that really want that job in Whitby. So you also have to look at people too, right? I'm not just going to throw my hat into something that my heart isn't in just because.
Yeah.
I want to be back at the federal level. I know that there is a capacity to do things like a national brain strategy, which people need. People living or being a caregiver for people with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and epilepsy and Rett syndrome across the age continuum. It's a challenge. And we could do better as a nation when it comes to some of these issues and that are dear to my heart. And that for me doesn't happen at a municipal or provincial level.
Fair enough. I'm just going to share my screen for a second. We did a municipal democracy index last year of the 32 biggest cities in Ontario. This was voter turnout. Whitby and Oshawa. Look at that, right at the bottom. Lots of room for growth there. We are lucky in Ontario to have nonpartisan, at least officially nonpartisan politics. Peter.
Oh, great, thanks. Well, appreciate what you shared with us so far. I'm wondering, it's obvious why they came to be a parliamentary secretary, the Prime Minister's office, fresh, new face, woman, business person, Black person. At that moment when they came to you, I'm sure you asked questions about what was involved in being a parliamentary secretary. Did you feel that you had any leverage yourself to say what you expected to be able to get out of being parliamentary secretary? Did you feel like you'd negotiate something that would give you a bit of a chance for your own agenda at all? Or were you disabused of that notion entirely by the other side?
So I will, Peter, you started off with a Snickers and you ended with this. So I'm going to put some of the responsibility on my plate as well in that. And I was very clear about this in the book, that I wish I'd gone into that meeting with a particular ask. I wish I'd gone into that meeting saying, I want a national brain strategy. I want to be a minister. I want this, or I want whatever. I did not. I went into that meeting with what I thought was an understanding of my job, which was to be honest to the Prime Minister, to be his ears on the ground, and to tell him the truth. And so our first meeting was December of 2015, and sat down in Center Block, office at Center Block, 3rd floor, and had a little bit of small chit chat. And then I said, let me tell you something. if you picked me to be your parliamentary secretary to fill any racial or gender gaps that you have in your cabinet, I don't want it. I'm not interested in being tokenized. I want to be utilized for some very strategic things that I could help you achieve. And I didn't say anything that I wanted. Fair enough, but I made it very clear that I just didn't want to be there because I was Black and a woman. And I was told at that point, no. We had a great relationship, clearly, very smart, very whatever. This is why you're here. And I said, good, because I'm perfectly okay being the member of parliament for Whitby. I do not need another title. I want a job. And so while I didn't specifically ask for anything, I actually didn't think that was the opportunity to do so, because we only had a very small period of time. And so when I created the framework, I actually typed up a document, created a framework that said, these are the jobs that I think are your gaps. So I looked at the minister's mandate. So, okay, very business person. I have 2 MBAs. I really look at things from a business perspective. I needed to look at all of the ministerial mandates. He was the Minister of Youth and the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. I wanted to see where the gaps were, and I wanted to see where I could fill in holes. So that I put together a framework, and I said, these are the things that I think I could do to fill in where there's gaps in what you want to do, and here's where I could fill that in. And here are also the 2 things that I want: brain strategy, national senior strategy. So I put it together in a framework that was presented in January, maybe February, but I'd say February is the latest. And that, I thought, was a better approach than sitting with him for 15 minutes and saying, let me get a national brain strategy and a national senior strategy without any context. And I think maybe at that point, I may have missed my opportunity, because after I said that I didn't want to be tokenized, I was asked if I trusted his judgment. And I said no. Which is probably not the answer that you should give to a prime minister on your first day of the job. But I didn't know what else to say that would have been honest. It would be like me meeting you today, and then tomorrow you saying, Celina, do you trust my judgment? Peter, I'm sorry, I don't know you. You may have great judgment, but I actually don't know you. So I can't say yes, that I trust your judgment because you picked me to be your parliamentary secretary. I have no idea why you're picking me to be your parliamentary secretary. So I'm going to say no to you. And I think at that point, that was the point where I may have blew it from day one, which sucks, but I didn't know that at the time. And again, here I am.
Celina, I want to give you a few minutes if you'd like to just promote anything other than your book, which I'm going to send out links tomorrow to the book. There's an audiobook, there's a paper book, probably an ebook. Anything you're working on now, any campaigns, any projects related to mental health, equity, any newsletters people can sign up for? I'll put your Twitter handle in the feed. Do you want to just pitch anything? You got a little audience here.
I know, and I really appreciate the audience, Dave. I think I'll just close by saying thank you to everybody who's here. I don't know. It's always sort of weird doing these kind of talks because I'm not your typical politician. I'm Celina, and I do things a little bit differently, and I appreciate it, Dave. I appreciate you giving a platform to me to tell a story that's probably unconventional. And yeah, I don't know what else to say. I don't have anything to pitch. Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
I don't have anything to pitch.
Well, you
feel like I feel like I'm with the Prime Minister again in December 2015, where I should have come with a list of things. Yeah, Peter really like preempted that with the previous question, but I don't have anything
That's
except
okay.
my book that I'm peddling. But
The book is great. So we usually send out an email following these sessions with links. So I'll send everyone the links to the various places you can get the book. And if you think of anything else, Celina, it can even be someone else's campaign, something else you're really excited about. Like you just want everyone to go and support Sally in Alberta, who's just launched a really cool foundation about elephants. I don't know.
you know what? I would honestly say just support each other. I mean, right now where we are in this world, a lot of people are struggling. Clearly, there's challenges. And so if anybody has so if you were going to support me in any way, shape, or form, if there's anything that's near and dear to your heart right now, go and support that thing. I will pay it forward to how many 36 to 40 something different organizations that are near and dear to your heart. Support that and you will do right by me. I'm good with that.
Great. Well, Celina, I want to thank you for everything you've done. I think you're really inspiring, not just to young Black girls, to all of us. So many of us are turned off by so many negative things we see in our political spaces, and we're disgusted and we're hungry for a new kind of leadership, a new kind of politics. And you're a great example of someone who tried to lead by example at personal cost and suffering. And I want to thank you for all those chances you took and the honesty that you lived. It makes a difference. It really does. It's people like you who changed the whole system. So thank you. And thank you for sharing your time tonight.
Thank you. Namaste. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you all.
And thanks everyone for watching. There'll be another one in a few weeks. I'll send you an email.
Thank you.
All right.
Excellent.
Take care. Sweet dreams. Take care of each
Bye,
other.
everyone.
Bye.